The world was stunned when Toya Bush-Harris spoke out about her marriage to Eugene Harris, revealing cracks in a relationship that had long been admired as one of the strongest on Married to Medicine. For years, fans had looked at the couple as an ideal union, two people facing life's challenges together, building a family, and overcoming obstacles hand in hand. Their story seemed like one forged from trust, hard work, and unwavering commitment. Yet beneath the surface of admiration and glossy appearances, a quiet tension had been growing for years, a tension that no one saw until it erupted in the most devastating way possible. Toya had never shied away from sharing the realities of her marriage with the audience. She spoke openly about the hurdles she and Eugene faced, from financial pressures to the constant balancing act required to maintain their household while raising children. On the surface, it seemed as though they navigated these difficulties with grace. Yet beneath that, there had always been a persistent undercurrent of loneliness. Eugene, as a dedicated physician, had a demanding schedule. Long, unpredictable hours at the hospital often meant he wasn't home when Toya needed him most. Her words revealed the emotional strain, the yearning for connection, the emptiness left by his absence, and the relentless responsibility she carried alone. Fans sympathized, recognizing the challenge of balancing love, family, and career. Toya's vulnerability resonated because it mirrored struggles many people face in their own relationships, but the cracks that existed in their marriage were far more profound than anyone had imagined. The loneliness and neglect were merely symptoms of a larger problem, a silent drift that had been occurring for years. Then, in a twist no one could have foreseen, the truth came crashing down. Toya discovered that Eugene had been unfaithful, not with a casual acquaintance or a fleeting encounter, but with a mysterious woman who had somehow slipped unnoticed into their lives. And she didn't hear about it through rumors or gossip. She caught him herself. Walking in on him in the act, she was confronted with a betrayal so immediate and undeniable that it shattered her world. The man she had trusted implicitly, the father of her children, the partner she had supported through countless challenges, had violated the bond they had built. The depth of the betrayal was crushing. It wasn't merely the infidelity that hurt. It was the obliteration of the trust and love that had once felt unshakable. Years of sacrifices, shared struggles, and emotional investment suddenly seemed meaningless. Toya was forced to reckon with a truth she had never imagined. The man she loved and relied on had been living a hidden life, prioritizing his desires over their marriage. To make matters worse, Eugene's reaction was far from what anyone expected. There was no immediate remorse, no heartfelt apology, no attempt to repair the damage. Instead, he became distant, silent, and defensive. His response, or lack thereof, compounded the emotional devastation Toya felt. It became clear that this betrayal was just the tip of an iceberg that had been forming beneath the surface for years. Toya, however, was not someone to back down in the face of adversity. She confronted Eugene, but it wasn't only about the affair. It was about the accumulation of years spent feeling emotionally neglected, of striving to maintain a marriage largely on her own while Eugene's career dominated his focus. She had long expressed her need for attention, companionship, and emotional support, but this revelation underscored a harsh reality. She had been fighting a battle alone, and the person she relied upon had checked out long before the affair ever occurred. The aftermath of this confrontation revealed even more complexity. Eugene did not respond with empathy or accountability. Instead, he posted cryptic messages on social media about protecting his peace and prioritizing his career, as if the emotional devastation he caused could be dismissed by vague affirmations of self-preservation. Toya realized that Eugene might not care about reconciliation, and his focus on himself illuminated a truth she had been avoiding. The marriage she had fought to preserve might no longer have a future. Faced with this reality, Toya took a brave step. She began to share her journey on social media, speaking candidly about her healing process, self-discovery, and empowerment. Her posts were no longer confined to the confines of her private grief. They became a public declaration of resilience. Fans began to witness a transformation as she moved from a woman silently enduring emotional neglect to someone actively reclaiming her power. Yet even as Toya began to rebuild herself emotionally, a further revelation shook her world. In an interview, she disclosed that Eugene had also been siphoning money from her without her knowledge, spending it for his own purposes and allegedly on the woman with whom he had the affair. This shocking claim reframed the entire narrative, adding layers of financial betrayal to the already devastating emotional wounds. Toya's sense of trust, already fractured by infidelity, was now compounded by the realization that her wealth, something she had worked tirelessly to build, had been exploited. This financial betrayal was not just about money, it was about control, power, and deceit within their relationship. Toya began to question everything. Had Eugene loved her for herself, or had he been motivated by her wealth all along? The entire foundation of their partnership was thrown into doubt. The couple fans had admired as a power duo now appeared vulnerable to the very human flaws they had never anticipated. Through it all, Eugene's behavior remained largely unchanged. He continued to post vague messages about personal peace and career focus, demonstrating a striking indifference to the damage he had caused. Toya, by contrast, refused to remain silent. Her social media became her platform for honesty, empowerment, and reclaiming agency over her own life. She spoke about self-love, growth, and resilience, not just to process her own pain, but to inspire those watching her journey unfold. As the narrative developed, it became increasingly clear that Toya's transformation was more than a response to betrayal. It was a profound assertion of independence and self-worth. She was no longer the woman waiting for Eugene to realize his mistakes or fight for their marriage. She was becoming a woman who prioritized her own well-being, who refused to allow past neglect and betrayal to define her future. And yet, the story was far from over. Questions lingered. Could Toya forgive Eugene? Could their marriage survive such a multi-layered betrayal? Or had this chapter closed irrevocably? Fans watched with bated breath as she took each step toward emotional freedom, and Eugene's silence only underscored the growing distance between them. This was the beginning of a new narrative, not one defined by infidelity, betrayal, or neglect, but by a woman reclaiming her voice, her power, and her life. Toya was not simply surviving, she was actively reshaping her future on her own terms. The journey ahead promised challenges, but for the first time in years, Toya's story was hers alone to write. As Toya delved deeper into her journey of self-discovery, the full weight of Eugene's betrayal became impossible to ignore. The affair had been devastating enough, but the revelation about financial manipulation added a new dimension to her heartbreak. It wasn't merely a personal violation, it was a violation of trust on multiple levels: emotional, familial, and financial. Toya realized that the man she had loved, the man she had shared her dreams and vulnerabilities with, had been living a dual life that undermined every aspect of their marriage. The process of processing these layered betrayals was excruciating. Toya experienced a tumultuous mix of anger, sadness, disbelief, and even a lingering sense of guilt. She questioned herself relentlessly. Could she have seen the signs earlier? Had she ignored subtle cues that hinted at Eugene's emotional and financial disengagement? These were the thoughts that haunted her as she struggled to reconcile the Eugene she thought she knew with the man who had so drastically broken her trust. Fans followed her every move, witnessing firsthand the rawness of her emotions and the clarity of her self-reflection. Toya's willingness to speak openly about her pain resonated with countless women who had experienced similar betrayals. Through her vulnerability, she became a symbol of strength. Rather than collapsing under the weight of humiliation and heartbreak, she chose to rise, to confront her reality, and to assert her independence. The stark contrast between Toya's proactive healing and Eugene's passive avoidance became increasingly evident. While she meticulously documented her journey of recovery, sharing posts about self-love, boundaries, and personal growth, Eugene remained detached. His social media was filled with cryptic statements about protecting his peace and focusing on his career, as if his emotional distance could absolve him of responsibility. Fans noticed this disparity, and it fueled speculation about the long-term viability of their marriage. Toya's confrontation with Eugene had revealed layers of long-standing neglect that had gone unnoticed for too long. The emotional absence she felt wasn't a sudden occurrence. It had been slowly building over years. Eugene's dedication to his work, while admirable in professional terms, had created a chasm between them that only widened with time. Toya had tried repeatedly to bridge that gap, expressing her needs and seeking reassurance, but her efforts were met with indifference or dismissive reassurances. The affair was not the beginning of the fracture. It was the culmination of years of unmet emotional needs. As she navigated this painful terrain, Toya discovered something crucial. Healing required not just acknowledgement of the betrayal, but also a reclamation of her personal power. She began setting boundaries, reasserting her autonomy, and prioritizing her emotional and mental health. This included focusing on her own goals, reconnecting with her passions, and surrounding herself with supportive individuals who uplifted her rather than contributed to her pain. The financial betrayal was another layer of complexity that Toya could not ignore. Learning that Eugene had been taking her money without consent was both shocking and deeply personal. Money, in many ways, represented trust, stability, and mutual respect in their marriage. The realization that Eugene had undermined that trust for personal gain was a profound betrayal. Toya had invested not only financially, but emotionally in their life together, and Eugene's actions signaled that her contributions were undervalued and exploited. This revelation forced her to reevaluate the dynamics of their relationship entirely. She began questioning the motivations behind every shared memory, every display of affection, and every promise made. Was the affection genuine, or had it been tainted by ulterior motives? The lines between love and manipulation blurred, leaving Toya grappling with a painful clarity. She had been treated as a means to an end rather than a partner in true equality. Despite the complexity of her emotions, Toya's approach was deliberate and intentional. She refused to allow herself to be consumed by bitterness or despair. Instead, she channeled her energy into rebuilding herself, step by step. Each day became an exercise in self-empowerment, journaling to process feelings, engaging in therapy to understand patterns, and connecting with her community for support and validation. Through these acts, she began to reclaim the version of herself that had been overshadowed by years of neglect and betrayal. Meanwhile, Eugene's absence in this journey was striking. He did not step forward to apologize, to clarify, or to attempt reconciliation. His silence, combined with the occasional vague posts about peace and career, highlighted a fundamental disconnect in priorities. Whereas Toya was actively confronting the consequences of betrayal, Eugene seemed to be retreating further into his own world. Fans observed this with growing concern, recognizing that the imbalance in accountability was contributing to the widening gap between them. The public nature of their lives added another layer of complexity. Fans had watched Toya and Eugene as a couple for years, admiring their resilience and the image of a partnership built on love and support. Now, with the revelations of infidelity and financial deception, those same fans were confronted with a new reality. Toya's candidness transformed her into a figure of empowerment. She wasn't just enduring heartbreak, she was modeling strength, transparency, and courage for a wide audience. Toya's evolving self-awareness also influenced how she perceived her children and family life. She recognized that remaining in a marriage devoid of trust and emotional reciprocity would not only harm her, but also impact her children. By prioritizing her well-being, she was creating a more stable, authentic environment for her family, a space where emotional honesty, integrity, and respect were upheld. This realization gave her an even stronger sense of purpose, reinforcing her commitment to moving forward with clarity and strength. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. Toya's social media posts began to reflect a woman who was no longer defined by her relationship or the betrayal she had endured. Her messages shifted from pain and hurt to empowerment, self-love, and independence. Fans witnessed her evolving identity, one that embraced autonomy, resilience, and the courage to leave behind what no longer served her. Even as she strengthened her resolve, questions lingered. Could Eugene redeem himself? Could he acknowledge the full scope of his actions and the damage he had inflicted? Would he ever confront the emotional and financial betrayal in a meaningful way? His continued silence only reinforced the reality that Toya's journey was now solitary, a path she had to walk on her own terms. In stepping into this newfound independence, Toya exemplified the strength required to navigate a relationship's collapse. She showed that healing is not linear, that reclaiming one's power often involves painful realizations, and that true growth emerges from embracing authenticity and self-respect. Each revelation, from emotional neglect to infidelity and financial betrayal, served as a catalyst for transformation. What could have been a story of despair became a narrative of resilience and empowerment. As part 2 draws to a close, the story is far from over. Toya's journey continues, but the direction is clear. It is one of self-prioritization, empowerment, and liberation from the shadows of betrayal. Eugene's silence and distance, once a source of pain, now serve as a marker of the irreparable choices that have shaped this chapter of their lives. Toya is no longer waiting for someone else to define her. She is defining herself. As Toya stepped fully into this new chapter of her life, the clarity she gained was profound. The betrayal by Eugene, both emotional and financial, had been devastating, but it also served as a mirror, reflecting truths about herself, her worth, and the type of life she deserved. She realized that true love, respect, and partnership could not exist in a vacuum where one person was continually absent, whether physically, emotionally, or morally. The years of compromise, quiet suffering, and attempts to salvage the marriage were now understood as lessons, painful but ultimately empowering. The journey toward healing was far from simple. Toya had to confront not just the betrayal, but also the trauma of having invested so much in a relationship that had slowly eroded under neglect and deceit. Every memory, every shared dream, and every plan they had made together now carried a tinge of betrayal. She had to disentangle herself from the emotional web that had bound her to Eugene for so long. This required courage, reflection, and the willingness to accept that some things could never be repaired. Through her social media, Toya became a beacon for others navigating similar storms. She spoke openly about the heartbreak, the anger, and the disappointment, but she also highlighted resilience, self-worth, and the importance of setting boundaries. Her posts weren't just cathartic, they were educational and inspirational. She shared the practical steps she was taking: therapy to address lingering emotional wounds, mindfulness practices to reclaim her peace, and creating a support network of friends and family who validated her feelings and encouraged her growth. Fans responded with an outpouring of support, messages affirming her bravery, and personal stories echoing similar experiences of betrayal and renewal. The narrative of her marriage had shifted dramatically. What had once been a story of love and admiration from the public eye had transformed into a cautionary tale about trust, self-respect, and the dangers of emotional neglect. Toya recognized that the collapse of her marriage was not a reflection of failure on her part, but rather a testament to the incompatibility and choices of a partner who could not prioritize her emotional well-being. Eugene's silence throughout this entire process only amplified Toya's clarity. Each cryptic post about personal peace or professional dedication reminded her that he had not been willing, or perhaps able, to meet her halfway, emotionally or morally. The man who had once been central to her world was now a peripheral figure, a reminder of lessons learned rather than a presence to be mourned endlessly. This realization allowed Toya to redirect her energy. Instead of dwelling on the past or waiting for apologies, she focused on building a life that centered her needs, desires, and aspirations. Financial independence became another cornerstone of her empowerment. After discovering that Eugene had been using her money without her consent, Toya took deliberate steps to regain control over her finances. She implemented safeguards, sought professional advice, and reclaimed autonomy over her resources. This wasn't just about money. It was a symbolic act of reclaiming power and agency in a relationship where trust had been repeatedly violated. The act of taking back control underscored a larger truth: that self-respect requires boundaries, accountability, and a refusal to allow betrayal to dictate the terms of one's life. In parallel, Toya nurtured her emotional and spiritual growth. The months following the revelation of Eugene's infidelity and financial misconduct were filled with self-reflection, meditation, and learning to trust herself again. She had spent years seeking validation and connection from someone who was incapable of providing it fully, and now she understood that her own validation was paramount. This realization gave her freedom to set standards, freedom to pursue passions, and freedom to redefine her identity outside the confines of a fractured marriage. Her children, too, were an important focus. Toya recognized that modeling strength, self-love, and resilience was perhaps the most valuable lesson she could impart. By navigating heartbreak with grace and determination, she was teaching them about accountability, honesty, and the importance of protecting one's emotional and financial well-being. In this, she found a sense of purpose that transcended her personal grief. Her journey became not only about reclaiming her own life, but also about creating a stable, empowered environment for her children to grow up in. Eugene, meanwhile, remained in the shadows. He had opportunities to address his mistakes, to demonstrate genuine remorse, and to rebuild trust, but he chose silence. His posts about personal peace and professional dedication only reinforced the growing divide. The man who had once been a partner in Toya's world was now a cautionary figure, a representation of what happens when accountability is absent and emotional neglect becomes habitual. Fans watched this dynamic unfold with a mix of frustration and fascination, seeing firsthand the contrast between Toya's proactive healing and Eugene's retreat into self-focus. By the time several months had passed, Toya had transformed in ways that were both visible and intangible. She carried herself with renewed confidence. Her decisions reflected clarity and intentionality, and her social media became a platform not of lament, but of empowerment. She spoke of independence, resilience, and growth, not as platitudes, but as lived experiences. She demonstrated that heartbreak does not have to be permanent, that betrayal does not define a person's worth, and that reclaiming one's life requires deliberate action and courage. Perhaps the most powerful element of Toya's journey was the shift in narrative control. For years, the story of her marriage had been a shared one, told through the lens of a couple perceived as unbreakable. Now, Toya reclaimed her voice. She reframed the story, not as a tragedy of infidelity, but as a story of awakening, self-respect, and transformation. She took what could have been a narrative of defeat and turned it into one of triumph. As the world watched, it became clear that Eugene's role in the story had diminished to a footnote. The man who had once been central to her identity, her decisions, and her emotional landscape was now largely irrelevant. What mattered was Toya's reclamation of self, the courage to move forward, the decision to prioritize her own happiness, and the determination to create a life free from betrayal and neglect. In the end, the lesson was undeniable. Toya's journey showed that healing is not about reconciliation with those who hurt us. It is about reconciling with ourselves. It is about understanding one's own value, establishing boundaries, and refusing to allow the past to dictate the future. For Eugene, the consequences of his choices were clear. The silence, the avoidance, and the emotional abdication left him in a place of irrelevance in the story of Toya's life. For Toya, the consequences were liberation, self-discovery, and empowerment. Her story serves as a blueprint for anyone navigating heartbreak, betrayal, or emotional neglect. It is a reminder that strength comes from facing pain directly, that independence is forged through resilience, and that personal growth is possible even in the aftermath of profound betrayal. As Toya's narrative continues to unfold publicly, one thing remains certain: she is no longer defined by the mistakes of others. She is defined by her courage, her determination, and her unwavering commitment to herself. And while the chapter with Eugene may have closed, the next chapter of Toya's life, one written entirely on her own terms, is just beginning. This is a story of empowerment, transformation, and the undeniable power of reclaiming one's life after betrayal. Toya has emerged not just as a survivor, but as a woman who has taken back her narrative, embraced her independence, and stepped boldly into the future she always deserved.